On our wedding day, I lifted the veil. She was so beautiful my legs went weak. But before the tune finished, a barbarian's blade was at my throat. My mother died before my eyes. My wife was taken. When I crawled out of the coffin, an arrow was still stuck in my chest. Everyone told me to stop looking, saying she must have been defiled. I tucked her red skirt into my bosom and journeyed north. She was my lawful wife. I had promised her I would never let her down. Winter of 340 AD, north bank of the Yellow River, Xi'an County. I was the only student left in the schoolhouse. The lame old teacher finished his last lesson and waved his hand to dismiss us. I packed up my stationery and walked up to him. Master, the war in the north is intense. The barbarians could attack any moment. Come south with me. The old man shook his head calmly. I am but a withered tree, unwilling to leave my homeland. The barbarians are cruel and violent. Staying here will only bring you disaster. I urged. If they want to kill, let them kill. If they want to eat, let them eat. As long as I don't mind my old bones being tough and sour. I sighed helplessly, took out a cloth bundle the size of a fist from my bosom, and offered it with both hands. Master, you have taught me for 10 years. Please accept this silver. Keep it for emergencies. Your monthly support has never been lacking. I absolutely cannot take this silver. The old gentleman waved his hand repeatedly. I shoved the bundle into his arms, turned around, and quickly walked away. From behind came the master's advice. The way of a gentleman may bring harm in troubled times. In the future, you must distinguish good from evil and act accordingly. I turned back and bowed once more. I turned and went out the door. Heavy snow was falling. The servant Xiao Wu had been waiting in the snow. Xiao Wu was a year younger than me, the son of the family's hereditary servant. Passing by a food stall at the three-way intersection, I bought a steamed bun and handed it to him. Tomorrow you're getting married. I wonder if the second Miss Lin is good-looking or not. Xiao Wu munched on the bun as he followed me. A woman's virtue is what matters, not her appearance, I said seriously. That's easy for you to say. If the second Miss Lin looked like a steamed bun, would you still want her? Impertinent. I laughed and lifted my foot. Xiao Wu laughed and dodged. When I got home, the women of the inner courtyard were decorating the bridal chamber with lanterns and banners, but anxiety was written on everyone's faces. The Zhao kingdom was about to attack. The Mo family wanted me to marry Lin Ruochen before the southward relocation. After dinner, my father took me to the ancestral hall to pay respects. When the rites were done, he didn't rush to leave, but instead took out 8 gold ingots from the bottom of a food box and buried them in the northwest corner of the hall. I didn't ask. I understood that my father was securing a way out for the family. The next morning, I changed into new clothes, mounted my horse, and led a sedan chair to fetch my bride. When we arrived at the Lin family home, the villagers swarmed the road, blocking our way. For a major wedding, one must scatter coins to clear the path. I took a money pouch from my saddle and tossed it to Xiao Wu, who scooped out copper coins and scattered them left and right. The crowd scrambled for them and made way. After a series of ceremonies, the bride entered the sedan chair and the wedding procession returned. Due to the urgency of the war, everything was simplified, and by the early afternoon hour, they were sent into the bridal chamber. Once the matchmaker left, only she and I remained in the room. I stood by the table, gazing at the wedding scales and the ruby scepter in the red lacquered wooden tray. After a long hesitation, I finally picked up the scales, walked to the bed, forced down my nervousness, and lifted Lin Ruochen's bridal veil. As I lifted the bridal veil, my nervousness instantly turned into joy. She was strikingly beautiful, her fine silky hair coiled and then hanging down beside her ears, her oval face fair and flawless, with willow leaf eyebrows, phoenix eyes, a delicate nose, and cherry red lips. As she lowered her head shyly after the veil was lifted, she exuded a maiden's charm. Lin Ruochen raised her hand to remove the hairpin and took off the veil. She walked lightly to the table, poured a cup of tea, and handed it to me. I quickly took it, and our fingers inevitably touched. Both of us blushed instantly. "Are you hungry?" I asked, in a moment of panic, an extremely foolish question. She shook her head slightly, indicating she wasn't tea hungry. "You rest first, I'll go out for a walk." I set down the teacup and wanted to escape, so intense was my nervousness. "You," came her voice from behind, filled with shock and worry. She had clearly misunderstood. "Don't misunderstand. Having a wife like you is a blessing for the Mo family. I'll be back soon. I comforted her and quickly opened the door to leave. After steadying myself outside the door, I realized that Mother and the matchmaker were standing at the doorway of the eastern wing, staring at me nervously. Son, why did you come out? Mother asked first. Mother, it's daytime. How can we perform the ritual of marriage? I lowered my voice. The matchmaker sighed in relief. Oh my, Master Mo, you startled me. What's there to fear in daytime? Go on. Don't keep the bride waiting long. Mother, I pleaded, looking to her for help. She smiled. Too much Confucius and Mencius have turned you into a bookworm. Sister son, you may go now. We trust the Lin family's character. When I returned to the room, Lin Ruochan was still sitting by the bed. She had overheard the conversation outside and realized I was merely shy, so the anxiety on her face had vanished. Only shyness remained. Heaven has been kind to me, allowing me to marry you. From now on, I will take good care of you and never mistreat or wrong you. I walked to the table and sat down. I spoke these words with confidence, for they came from my heart. To have a husband like you is my great fortune, Ruochan softly replied. After I tie up my hair, I will surely uphold a wife's duties, honor my parents-in-law, manage the household for you, and bear your children. She spoke so fluently. How long have you practiced this? I couldn't help but smile and ask. I won't tell you, she murmured, lowering her head. Lin Ruochan's dowry included 4 special items: noodles, books, embroidery, and a zither wrapped in red cloth. The 4 dowry items indicated that the bride could cook, read, write, embroider, and understand music. The phoenix had a spiritual root, soared through clouds, flapped its wings, and perched in one place. I looked at the dowry on the table and was moved to speak. The phoenix is born with sacred feathers, riding the wind straight to the 9 heavens. She casually continued, and I was slightly taken aback. What I had just said wasn't recorded in any poem or book. I didn't expect her to match it so neatly. But her following line was too grand in spirit. She didn't seem as fragile as she appeared. I didn't dwell on it. It was ultimately a good thing for a wife to be talented. She looked at the bamboo flute hanging on the wall. Husband, if you're willing, we could play a piece together to connect our hearts through music. Very well. She moved to the table, adjusted her seat, and tuned the strings. I took down the bamboo flute from the wall and wiped it. A piece of phoenix seeking his mate, flute and zheng harmonizing, like instruments in perfect accord. When the melody reached a high note, her zheng playing did not hold back, repeatedly surging upward, forcing my flute to become even more piercing. Each time I strained to raise my flute's pitch, her zheng would soften into a gentle murmur. When the next high pitch came, she would raise it again, pushing me to strive upward once more. As a scholar, playing such a high-pitched flute was indeed a bit tiring, but my heart was joyful. With her managing the household, our family was sure to revive. Before the song ended, hurried footsteps suddenly came from outside the door. It was Xiao Wu. He never entered the inner courtyard on ordinary days, so his frantic rush must mean something urgent. I put down the flute and opened the door to go out. I saw Xiao Wu's face pale as death, his eyes full of terror. Master, it's terrible. The barbarians have attacked. As soon as he finished speaking, the sound of horse hooves came from outside the city, followed by screams and cries. Quick, hurry! Mother rushed out of the main house, pulling me and Lin Ruochan and running outside. The maids were frantically gathering valuables, while father and Xiao Wu dashed to the carriage at the gate, fastening the reins. By the time we burst out of the pharmacy gate, the entire Xi'an County was already engulfed in flames. Everywhere were people fleeing and wailing. The barbarian cavalry shuttled through the streets and alleys, killing everyone they saw. Father drove the carriage, desperately heading toward the south gate with us. Just as they were about to reach the city gate, a feathered arrow came flying, hitting my father squarely in the shoulder. He let out a miserable cry and tumbled off the carriage. My lord! Mother jumped off the carriage without a second thought. I followed right after, trying to save them, but a stray arrow grazed past my scalp. Husband! Lin Ruochan screamed from the carriage. I turned around and saw a one-eyed man riding a black horse, charging toward the carriage with a sinister grin. He grabbed her and pulled her onto his horse, while another maidservant was also taken at the same time. When her run, Mother shouted at the top of her lungs. Then I watched helplessly as a sharp arrow pierced through her head, nailing her to the ground. An ice hole. The entire world had become an ice hole. When Xiao Wu dragged my injured body onto the frozen surface of a yellow river, a Hu barbarian arrow was still lodged in my chest. That arrow had struck me, but I couldn't feel any pain. The only thing I could do was force my eyes open. I watched as the carriage carrying Lin Ruochen was dragged farther and farther away by the Hu barbarians. I could see she was awake, but from start to finish, she neither spoke nor resisted. She was scared out of her wits. Overwhelming grief made me lose consciousness completely. The last thing I saw was Xiao Wu still struggling to climb out of the ice cave. When I woke up again, I was lying in a dilapidated earthen house on the north bank. My clothes had dried, I was lying on a pile of straw, and a fire was burning in the center of the room. Xiao Wu was not there. I burst into tears. Just a day ago, the whole family had gathered to discuss the wedding details. Now I lay here alone, with an arrow wound on my chest. Xiao Wu came back, bringing herbs and food. "You're back," I said. Looking at the medicine box in his hand, it was from the MO family pharmacy. "You need to apply the medicine, and we also need to eat." "Did the barbarians spot you?" "They're all gone. Left last night." Xiao Wu pounded the herbs with a mortar. "Are there still survivors in the city?" "I didn't see any." Xiao Wu shook his head. "Xiao Wu, let's go home." A strong urge suddenly surged within me. I wanted to go home. Even if home was no longer what it used to be, it was still the house where my loved ones had lived. Only there could I find some comfort. I want to go back too. But right now the city is full of corpses everywhere. I'm afraid it will frighten you. I'm not afraid. Besides, there's nothing here. Only by going back can there be a way to survive. I leaned on a tree branch as Xiao Wu carried my mother's body on his back. The two of us, master and servant, walked across the frozen river. On the dozen-mile road from the riverbank to the city gate, dead bodies were everywhere. Intact corpses were rare. Most were of the elderly, children, and men, with young women's bodies conspicuously absent. I saw many familiar faces among the crowd. Every time I spotted one, I couldn't help but tremble. By the time we entered the city, I was already numb and no longer afraid. On the way home, I kept my head down, searching for tracks. Only my family had used a horse-drawn cart yesterday. As long as I followed the tracks, I could find the direction where Lin Ruochen was taken. But the snow in the city was trampled into a chaotic mess by the jumble of footprints, and the wheel tracks had completely disappeared. Li Fei's heart ached at these words, and he held back tears as he said, "A mortal's life is but a fleeting moment. Even if one schemes endlessly and enjoys wealth for a time, 100 years later, it's nothing but a handful of dirt. How much more so for someone like me, who has toiled without complaint for over a decade, yet remains a despised adopted son, with no origin and no... It's better to devote myself to the Tao and hold on to a hope, so that even in death, I'll have no regrets." With that, Li Fei kowtowed heavily, and a trickle of blood slowly flowed down his forehead. "Senior, although Li Fei is dull-witted, he is willing to imitate a moth darting into a flame, even if it means being shattered to pieces. I will have no complaints. I wonder if the senior could grant me a chance?" Qing He's gaze grew distant, as if recalling the hardships and setbacks of his own journey. He sighed deeply and said, "The path of cultivation is long, and 9 deaths out of 10 is an understatement. Back then, my old friend Li Qing voluntarily gave up his chance to cultivate that alone shows how difficult it is. Besides, the Shuiyun sect has its own threshold for accepting disciples. You're starting too late in life, unless..." "Unless what? Please, senior, speak plainly." Qing He hesitated for a moment, then took out a bottle of pills from his bosom, staring at Li Fei as he said, "Have you ever heard the saying, 'In the morning, hear the Tao, in the evening, die content'?" Li Fei nodded. Qing He said slowly, "The Shuiyun sect accept disciples under 2 conditions. 1. Age must not exceed 16. 2. The Tao Palace must already be opened. This pill is called the One Tao pill. After taking it, your spiritual insight will greatly increase within a day, and you may be able to open the Tao Palace." Li Fei's breathing grew rapid, and he clenched his fists tightly as he said, "This junior currently has nothing of value. I wonder if the senior could grant me the pill? Once I am accepted into Shuiyun sect, I will surely repay you." Qing He smiled, placed the jade bottle in front of Li Fei, and said, "Wanting to defy fate, and change your destiny is never that simple. After taking the one Tao pill, you'll have only one day left to live. If you cannot open the Tao Palace, you will die, your Tao will vanish, and you will never enter reincarnation. What? Li Fei was startled, and for a moment, he dared not pick up the jade bottle. Although he had already made up his mind, using the price of living only one day to gamble on a chance to cultivate was still far beyond what he had expected. Qinghe seemed to see through his hesitation and smiled faintly. Of those who take the one Tao pill, only 1 or 2 out of 100 survive. And even if you pass this trial, the path of cultivation is filled with blood and storms endless killings and treasure snatching. Every cultivator stands upon a mountain of white bones. Li Fei, with all this, do you still wish to cultivate? The scenes of the past 10+ years kept flashing through Li Fei's mind. The daily toil, his parents' curses, his younger brother's disdain, and his grandfather, who was always on his side, now gone. What did he have to fear? Li Fei suddenly smiled. 2 crystal teardrops slid down his face. He picked up the jade bottle and said softly, "Senior, I have no attachments left. This one Dao Dan is just what I need. If I die, I can at least accompany my grandfather in the afterlife." Qing, he flicked his whisk, his gaze subtly shifting toward the inner room as if hinting at something. Cultivators should not meddle in mortal affairs. Since you have made up your mind, you should take the pill as soon as possible. If you truly manage to open the Tao Palace, you can settle the karma here and then head east to the Water Cloud sect to find me. Thank you for the pill, Senior. Li Fei bua respectfully. When he looked up again, the morning hall was already empty. Karma? I'm all alone now. What karma is left? Li Fei stared blankly at the jade bottle in his hand. The next moment, a large hand suddenly appeared from behind and snatched the bottle away. Li Fei spun around sharply and saw Li Hu and the other 2 standing squarely behind him. Father, mother, I want to eat the immortal pill and become an immortal. Li Ong shouted excitedly, looking at Li Fei with a somewhat arrogant expression. Zhang Feng coaxed him repeatedly, her eyes full of affection. All right, once Xiaoong becomes an immortal, our family will have endless delicacies and fine silks. Li Hu remained silent, but his eyes burned with desire. He was also 61 this year, and though his body was still strong, a serious illness could bring him down no better than the old man. Moreover, even without illness, he might not live to the old man's age. Now that he had obtained this celestial elixir, how could he not be excited? At the thought, Li Hu didn't even bother with Zhang Feng and her son. He took the wooden box and left. Seeing this, Zhang Feng's heart sank, knowing Li Hu intended to monopolize it. She quickly instructed Liang a few words and hurried after him. Li Fei struggled to get up, but fell weakly to the ground. Father, mother, you must not eat it. You must not. On the other side, as soon as Li Hu returned to his room, Zhang Feng followed closely and asked, Li Hu, what do you think you're doing? This immortal elixir should be for Xiaoong. What use could a man in his 60s have for it? Shut up, you idiot. Li Hu barked. A brat like him? He's not worthy. This is my opportunity, won through fate. Why should I share it with anyone else? Zhang Feng stared at him in disbelief, her voice trembling. Xiaoong is your son. Once I become an immortal, I can have as many sons as I want, including you. Don't get cocky with me. Whether you'll still be worthy of being my woman is an open question. Zhang Feng, seeing the coldness in Li Hu's eyes, stepped back in fear, her voice quivering. You bastard. You're inhuman. Don't you remember what that old immortal said? That pill will deduct your lifespan, leaving you with only 1 day left. Do you dare to take it? At these words, Li Hu's body stiffened slightly, and he indeed calmed down. He had been so focused on the idea of becoming an immortal that he had overlooked the latter part of the Taoist words. Seeing that Li Hu had been temporarily steadied, Zhang Feng quickly softened her voice. Elder, think about it, becoming an immortal isn't that easy. Our little Ong is naturally gifted. Clearly he'll be someone capable in the future. If he becomes an immortal, how is it any different from us becoming immortals? Could we ask him to get us some more immortal medicine? Would he refuse? Li Hu clutched the jade bottle tightly, a hint of hesitation in his heart. He certainly knew that his chances of becoming an immortal were very low, but giving away the immortal medicine like this, he couldn't bear it, even if it was to his own son. Li Hu pulled out the stopper and poured out a pill as white as jade. He tentatively sniffed it, and his whole being was immediately immersed in a strange, medicinal fragrance. A hint of greed and madness flickered in Li Hu's eyes. After all, he had already lived for over 60 years, he might as well take a gamble. Just as Li Hu and his wife were locked in argument, a burly man in a loose short shirt hurried to the courtyard gate, strode past Li Fei, followed by Liang, whose expression was agitated. Li Fei was startled and quickly moved toward the inner room. The burly man was a butcher in the village, surnamed Zhao, his real name unknown, but everyone politely called him Boss Zhao. At this moment, although Zhao Laoda's face showed no expression, his heart was pounding like a drum. After all, he was just a mortal. How could he resist such temptation? Bang! The door was suddenly kicked to pieces. Under Li Hu's astonished gaze, Zhao Laoda strode in and said in a deep voice, "Li Hu, if you know what's good for you, hand over the elixir. Otherwise, don't blame me for being ruthless." Li Hungrias pupils contracta. He glanced at Li Ong behind the other man, and an unbelievable thought emerged from the depths of his mind. "Xiao Ong, you want to harm your father?" Zhao Laoda burst into laughter, his face full of mockery. Xiao Ong wouldn't harm his father. On the contrary, he has brought his father a tremendous opportunity. What do you mean? Li Hu's eyes flashed with murderous intent. The next moment, as if realizing something, he suddenly opened his mouth wide, his body frozen like a stone statue. Thud! And all was violently thrust into Li Hu's back from behind. Zhang Feng's whole body trembled, but her hands refused to let go. Gritting her teeth, she stabbed it in deeper. "I won't hide it from you anymore. Back then, you blamed me for not being able to bear children and beat me to the brink of death every day, never knowing the problem was with you. Xiao Ong is Brother Zhao's child. Li Hu, you schemed all you could, but what good did it do? One son you didn't father, another you raised for nothing. The Li family line ends with you." "Father?" Li Fei leaned against the door and called out in shock. Blood trickled from the corner of Li Hu's mouth. He closed his eyes, a few tears sliding down. He never expected that in his final moment before death, it would be a foster son who had always been looked down upon to call him father, while the son he had cherished for over a decade was just a bastard who killed him. "Heaven, you are so cruel." Li Hu's eyes snapped open. With a burst of unknown strength, he hurled the pill toward Li Fei. "Fei Hua, eat it." Seeing the immortal pill thrown to Li Fei by Li Hu, Zhang Feng panicked, pulled out an awl, and stabbed it deep into Li Hu's neck, shouting loudly, "Brother Zhao, the immortal pill." Li Hu let out a few gurgling sound from his throat, then fell to the ground with a thud, his eyes wide open in anger as blood pooled beneath him. Zhao Laoda charged fiercely, grabbing at Li Fei's throat. As a butcher by trade, he was stout and strong, and against a scrawny guy like Li Fei, he could easily snap his neck. Li Fei didn't have time to react. He just stuffed the enlightenment pill into his mouth and gulped it down. In an instant, the pill turned into a stream of heat that flowed into his body, rapidly spreading through his limbs and bones. Bastard! Zhao Laoda was both shocked and furious. He switched from grabbing to punching, slamming his fist hard into Li Fei's stomach to make him spit out the immortal medicine. But the next moment, he suddenly felt his body freeze, all his strength replaced by pain, and his eyes began to grow hollow. Li Fei knelt on one knee, his eyes bloodshot. His thin fist pierced straight into Zhao Laoda's abdomen and came out through his back, dripping with blood. "Brother Zhao." Zhang Feng stared blankly, slowly sitting down on the ground, as if unable to believe what had just happened. It was so hot. Li Fei swung his arm with what felt like the force of 1,000 pounds, sending Boss Zhao flying effortlessly. Zhao slammed against the wall with a loud crash. Zhang Feng shuddered, suddenly terrified, and began shrinking backward. "Xiao Fei, I'm your mother. Don't kill me, don't kill me." Zhang Feng held Liang, wetting herself in terror as Li Fei didn't even glance at her. Instead, he let out a sudden roar, ran out the door, and vanished. Li Fei burst through layers of rain, already drenched. Yet the strength surging within his body drove him to keep running until he plunged headfirst into the river, finally calming down. The path of alchemy cultivation. Li Fei instinctively flailed his arms and legs, crawled to the riverbank, and sat down blankly on a rock. In the drizzling rain, with disheveled hair, he looked up at the sky. He couldn't tell if it was rain or tears streaming down his neck. Li Fei felt his soul waver faintly, to the point he could barely sense his own body. The only thing he could clearly perceive was a heavy palace pressing down firmly on the top of his head, cutting off all communication between himself and the mysterious heavens and earth. He forcibly condensed his will and charged several times, but the palace remained utterly still, impassable like a great mountain. "So this is the Tao Palace," the elders said. "In the morning, hear the way. In the evening, die content. If I can't knock open the Tao Palace, do I only have one day left to live?" Li Fei didn't know how long he had been dazed until the heat inside him slowly subsided. He suddenly came to, stood up dejectedly, and trudged back the way he came. Step by step, when he finally reached home, he saw a crowd of villagers gathered in a circle, buzzing with chatter, with occasional bursts of laughter and crying. Seeing Li Fei return, the crowd instinctively parted to let him through. "Li Hu, you're not human. You can't have kids yourself. Why are you hitting me? I can get pregnant. Xiao Ong is going to become an immortal. Ha 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 ha. Don't kill me, don't kill me. Xiao Fei, I'm your mother." In the open space at the center of the crowd, Zhang Feng was shaking her head wildly, her soaked clothes covered in yellowish-brown filth. Liang, with vacant eyes, squatted beside her, motionless even when Zhang Feng wiped her grime-smeared hand across his face. Li Fei stood before Zhang Feng, his calm gaze resting briefly on each of the watching villagers' eyes. The next moment, the murmurs gradually faded into silence, leaving only the three of them in the yard. "Xiao Fei, I'm sorry, don't kill me." Zhang Feng's body kept shrinking back, but Li Fei picked her up. "Mother, it's raining heavily. Go inside," Li Fei said softly. Zhang Feng was quiet for a moment, but after Li Fei placed her on the bed, she curled up and began to beg for mercy again. Li Fei ignored her and went to the yard to find an axe and began sharpening it. Liang watched him with terror in his eyes, then turned and ran into the house. In the yard, Li Fei closed his eyes tightly, tears mingling with the pouring rain as they streamed down. Even though his fingers were scraped raw from sharpening, he seemed not to notice. More than an hour later, just as Liang was holding Zhang Feng and waiting for death, Li Fei entered carrying the axe. "Dad and Zhao, the boss's bodies have been buried. The house is patched up for now. We'll find someone to fix it later. The water is fetched and the firewood is stacked inside. There's still some money left in the house, and Zhao, the boss's meat shop. If you're capable, you should be able to live well." Liang didn't dare look at him, burying his head into Zhang Feng's arms. "Liang!" Li Fei's voice suddenly grew louder, startling Liang into a shudder. "Mother may have wronged many people, but she has never wronged you or me. Whether you go by Li or Zhao, she is still your mother. She is not crazy, and even if she were, you've learned a lot of father's medical skills. From now on, take care of yourself and her. As for us, we shall never see each other again." With that, Li Fei slashed off a piece of his tattered clothes, turned around, and disappeared through the doorway. The rain gradually grew heavier, pouring like a waterfall. Li Fei carried a rolled-up straw mat along the rugged path into the deep mountains, finally stopping on a hillside. He scooped out handful after handful of dirt, burying Li Qing. Though his hands were torn and bleeding, the medicinal power of the one Dao Dan was still at work, and soon they healed as before. Li Fei sat down against a nearby pine tree, tried to think of what else he could do. But when he remembered he only had one day left, he lost interest in everything. He once again charged at the Tao Palace, but still to no effect. Li Fei finally understood that this palace could not be opened with brute force. Tao, diligent governance, and guarding the heart that is the Tao. After 10 years of rising early and working hard from the age of 5 or 6, enduring cold stares every day, yet still being filial to parents and serving elders, in the end I was despised, left with nothing, not even a home that hated me. Is the Tao really like this? Punishing the strong and eliminating the evil is the Tao. Although I grew up in the mountains, I have heard of the distinction between the righteous Tao and the demonic Tao. Those demon lords kill wantonly and are perversely abnormal. If the Tao is like this, then they should not be allowed to achieve the Tao. Li Fei felt his soul growing more and more ethereal, as if it would dissipate in the next instant. Not to mention others. Hadn't he himself killed old Zhao, scared Zhang Feng crazy, and abandoned Liang to leave? If there really is a Tao in this world, what right does he have to hear it? Screech. Suddenly, A hawk's cry came from the gloomy and dark sky. Li Fei's eyes flickered, and his gaze followed a blue-gray old eagle as it drifted. In such heavy rain, the prey are all resting in their own dens. How could they come out for you to hunt? Li Fei sighed, as if feeling sorry for it. But the old eagle did not give up. It continued circling in the air. Suddenly, it transformed into a cyan lightning bolt, plummeting straight from the sky and landing outside a cave. Under Li Fei's puzzled gaze, it plunged inside. After a while, the eagle dragged a rabbit out, then wobbled into the air and crashed onto the cliff behind Li Fei. Having nothing better to do, Li Fei decided to climb a cliff. He was curious what could make this eagle fight so desperately. Chirp, chirp. On the cliff, two eaglets opened their beaks wide, waiting for their mother to feed them. Little did they know the heavy price their mother had paid for this prey. Li Fei could tell at a glance that one of the mother eagle's wings had been broken. It was a miracle she had managed to fly back at all. Even so, after this family of 3 finished eating the rabbit, they would likely starve to death in this heavy rain. Li Fei didn't understand why other eagles raised only 1 chick per pair, while this nest had 1 parent raising 2. The numbers had simply been swapped, but the difficulty increased tenfold. The mother eagle stared warily at Li Fei, using her relatively intact wing to shield the 2 eaglets for a long time. Perhaps because this human made no other move, or perhaps because the eaglets were truly starving. Under Li Fei's gaze, the mother eagle cautiously tore off pieces of rabbit meat and began to feed them. A sudden pang of sorrow struck Li Fei's heart. He smiled at the mother eagle and said, "You are a good mother." Having said that, he gently extended a finger toward the mother eagle. Startled, she pecked hard, and the beak was instantly stained with blood. "Drink!" Li Fei's finger kept reaching toward the mother eagle, resulting in it being repeatedly pecked into a mess. Even with the support of the Wenda Dan's medicinal power, there was no time for it to heal. Slowly, the mother eagle's wings fluttered again, and her feathers became glossy and new. Seeing that the mother eagle had fully recovered, Li Fei climbed down the cliff, sat down against the rock wall, and remained still like a statue. Time passed, and he didn't know how long. Suddenly, Li Fei was awakened by a wing patting him. He opened his eyes and saw that the sky had turned dark again. The rain had stopped and replaced by a bright moon hanging high in the vast sky. The pure white moonlight poured down, illuminating thousands of miles, then flickered like scattered silver on the distant rivers and lakes. Faced with such a magnificent scene of heaven and earth, Li Fei felt as insignificant as a speck of dust, as if he could be swallowed up by the vast multitude at any moment. The effects of the Wenda Dan gradually wore off, his consciousness slowly faded, and the light in his eyes dimmed bit by bit. With a familiar eagle's cry coming from his ear, Li Fei's consciousness gathered for a moment. He looked up at the sky and saw an eagle soaring upward, fluttering up and down under the silver light, battling against the boundless sky. Even though it was so small that it was only a black dot, it still lingered in Li Fei's pupils. "What is the Tao?" A voice came from the void, as ethereal as an auditory hallucination. As if inspired by the eagle, Li Fei spoke slowly but firmly. "I don't know. Some people are upright and respected, and perhaps they can transcend and achieve the Tao. But others act willfully and kill wantonly, yet they can also attain the Tao. Even I often cannot distinguish my own heart on one hand. I cling to that false, painful home, and on the other, I want to redden my eyes and kill them all. Perhaps." Li Fei paused and, just before his consciousness faded completely, murmured softly, "Good and evil are but a thought. Killing follows the heart. Perhaps the heart is the Tao, and the Tao lies within the heart." Dong, an ethereal aura spread across the sky, carried by a mysterious bell toll that echoed through heaven and earth. In a sea of flowers shrouded in immortal mist, a woman slowly opened her eyes, raised her head to gaze at the sky, a trace of bewilderment in her gaze. The sound of the great Tao is a celestial phenomenon that only appears when a cultivator perfectly breaks through a certain realm. For instance, ancient stele in the sect records that if a cultivator opens the 7th spiritual gate, it will trigger the sound of the great Tao. But as for this realm, No one has perfectly broken through it in tens of thousands of years, so the sound of the great Tao exists only in legends. Kulme. The woman's red lips parted slightly, and a soft whisper carried the resonance of the Tao into the void. The next moment, several streaks of light flew from the distance and transformed into a group of white-haired elders. Among them, an old woman with a childlike face and white hair stepped forward and bowed respectfully, saying, "Sect Master, what are your orders?" Within a radius of 1,000,000 li, anyone who opens the Tao Palace or achieves perfect body refinement today shall be accepted into our sect. Examine them carefully. If anyone manifests extraordinary signs, bring them to me immediately. The woman's eyes were deep, and the aura of the great Tao sound was extremely faint. She was well aware of everyone in the Spirit Gate realm within the Water Cloud sect, so it was impossible for anyone to have opened the 7th Spirit Gate. Thus, the one who triggered this sound must be a low-level cultivator. The old woman was stunned for a moment, then said subconsciously, "Arrange this vast. Even if all our sect's cultivators were dispatched, it would barely be a drop in the bucket. Moreover, go find them." The woman's tone grew cold. She said, "First, pass down the cultivation methods to all the great dynasties. Remember, the methods can be spread, but only accept those at the Tao Palace realm or with perfected body refinement. Then, order the Spirit Gate realm cultivators of the sect to ride flying swords to remote areas to recruit disciples, bringing them back one by one. After that, deploy the spirit boats. As long as we have enough spirit stones, even a late-stage body refinement cultivator can pilot them." The few elderly were greatly alarmed. Since ancient times, the methods had never been lightly taught. If the sect master opened the immortal gates so widely, wouldn't that drain the sect's foundation to nothing? Before the old woman could speak, another elder cut in, saying, "If the sect master acts in this way, the accumulation of tens of thousands of years of our sect will be ruined in a single day." The woman said coldly, "The situation in Yunlong Tianshui realm is as precarious as an egg against a boulder. Even a powerful sect like the former Tai Sword sect was destroyed overnight. The great calamity is imminent, and the heavenly Tao is incomplete. What use is it to hoard resources? They'd only end up as bridal gifts for others." The old man was stunned, silent for a long time, before sighing and leaving. The others, seeing this, said nothing more and disappeared one by one into the sea of flowers. Perfect Tao Palace, or perfect body refinement, that was Chun Feng of the Tai Sword sect back then. He fought to the death, yet he also preserved the spiritual energy of Yunlong Tianshui realm, sparing countless lives from the devastation. I hope you can be like him, bringing vitality to this realm. The woman sighed softly, but her gaze remained unwavering. Even without the sound of the great Tao, she had long planned to share all her heritage and summoned the major and minor sects of Yunlong Tianshui realm to jointly resist the great calamity. Now it was merely happening sooner. On the hillside, Li Fei slowly opened his eyes, only to be stung by a ray of sunlight, squinting slightly. "I'm not dead," Li Fei suddenly realized, sitting up abruptly. Subconsciously, he looked up at the palace above him. At some point, it had opened, floating and sinking in the void, with wisps of spiritual energy cascading down like a waterfall, cleansing his body. "My Tao Palace has opened." Li Fei turned around and threw a tentative punch. With the enhancement of spiritual energy, nearly half of his arm sank into the cliff. At this moment, he truly felt his own transformation. Whether it was the spiritual energy flowing within him or the Tao Palace above his head that connected heaven and earth, it all gave him a sense of sudden enlightenment and clarity of mind. "I barely survived, yet I actually opened the Tao Palace." Li Fei's heart was filled with mixed emotions. Thinking back on the joys and sorrows of the past 10+ years, it all felt like a dream. He walked to Li Qing's grave, knelt down with a thud, and said in a choked voice, "Grandpa, Xiaofei has opened the Tao Palace." Senior Qinghe said, "The path of cultivation is difficult, and even 9 deaths and 1 life is an understatement. Now, the past of Qingshan village is like smoke before my eyes. I have no more attachments, and it is time for me to embark on this journey. Grandpa, if your spirit is in heaven, bless me. If one day I truly reach the end of the immortal path, perhaps I can, by the end, Li Fei was already sobbing uncontrollably. The mother eagle, somehow, poked her head out from the cliff and called out, as if comforting him. Li Fei looked up and wiped his eyes, then resolutely stood up and walked step by step away from Qingshan village, his gaze gradually growing firm. Leaving this grave meant he was saying goodbye to everything in Qingshan village for good. After turning back several times, Li Fei reluctantly stepped into the woods, his thin figure disappearing from the mother eagle's sight. Jiang Hong wait. On an ancient road surrounded by thick trees, a carriage of about 20 people was slowly moving forward. Suddenly, an old man among them called out to the sturdy man leading the front, his expression serious. "What's wrong, oldie?" Jiang Hong turned his horse around and asked in confusion, the crisp sound of hooves especially clear in the silent forest. Jiang Yi frowned slightly, pondered for a moment, and said, "Something's off here. Have everyone be on alert and speed up. You take 2 people to scout, ahead be careful." Although Jiang Hong thought little of it in his heart, he knew what was important and immediately followed Jiang Yi's orders. However, as the sound of hooves grew more urgent, Jiang Hong's expression gradually turned serious, and his attitude was no longer as casual as before. It was too quiet. There wasn't even a single chirp of insects or birds, and the leaves hung motionless in the air, as if frozen. Just as Jiang Hong's unease was about to overflow from his chest, a sudden gust of wind swept through the forest, shaking the trees with a rustling sound. The next moment, a scream came from the rear of the convoy. Jiang Hong's pupils contracted, and he spun around abruptly, just in time to see a massive blood-red figure leap into the forest, dragging a guard away and vanishing from sight. A wild beast. Prepare for battle. Jiang Hong let out a loud roar and rushed to Jiang Yi's side, his gaze fixed firmly on the spot where the tiger had disappeared. Hearing this, everyone tightened their grip on their swords and knives, standing ready. Roar! A thunderous tiger's cry rang out. Amidst the shocked gazes of the crowd, a suffocating figure slowly stepped forward, its eyes filled with cruelty and savagery. Jiang Hong and the guard were stunned, their legs trembling slightly. They had seen many wild beasts before, but this was the first time they had encountered one so eerie. Jiang Yi's heart thumped as he saw the creature's massive body and blood-red eyes, realizing it was no ordinary tiger. He quickly ordered Jiang Hong to lead the 2 horses out, gut them, and spread them on the ground. "Please forgive us, Mountain Lord. We mortals are ignorant and foolish, having stumbled into your territory. We humbly offer this sacrifice, hoping you will accept it and let us pass." Jiang Yi bowed respectfully, but the blood-red tiger casually swatted the horse meat away with its massive paw and continued advancing toward the group. His heart sank. For some spirits, human flesh and blood were far more tempting than ordinary livestock. This one was clearly such a case. Without a change in expression, Jiang Yi slipped his right hand into his sleeve and gripped a sword-shaped talisman, a flicker of reluctance in his eyes. The Jiang family was one of the 2 cultivation families in Greenstone City. As the household steward, he naturally had some secret trump cards. This sword talisman was one of only 3 in the entire Jiang family capable of killing not just ordinary spirits, but even a cultivator who had recently broken through to the body-tempering realm in the blink of an eye. Just as Jiang Yi stared at the blood tiger's increasingly close head and prepared to throw the talisman, Jiang Hong behind him suddenly gritted his teeth, yanked him behind, and roared, "Let loose the arrows!" Jiang Yi's heart leaped. His old bones were no match for Jiang Hong's strength. In an instant, he was flung to the back, and the talisman in his hand fell to the ground. Not good. Jiang Yi was terrified. Such a fierce beast could not be harmed by mortal means. Without the cultivator's talismans, no matter how many guards there were, they would only end up buried here. But the others knew nothing of the talisman. Hearing Jiang Hong's command, the first row of guards quickly crouched down, and in that moment, over a dozen arrows shot out, flying toward the blood tiger. The next instant, a clatter of ding, ding, ding sounded endlessly, but the blood tiger merely shook its body, and the arrows fell to the ground, leaving only shallow scratches on its hide. Roar! Perhaps enraged by the mortal's attack, the blood tiger charged into the crowd, biting a guard in 2 with one gulp, while its sharp claws flailed wildly, reaping the lives of other guards. Jiang Hong's eyes were red. These guards had trained and traveled with him, as close as brothers. Seeing over a dozen of them brutally killed, he let out a roar, raised his long blade, and charged at the blood tiger. But in the blink of an eye, he was swatted away, blood spraying across the ground. Jiang Yi stared at the talisman behind the blood tiger, filled with utter despair. The Jiang family had traveled this ancient path for countless years, rarely even encountering wild beasts. To suddenly come across such a demon today, truly, fate played cruel tricks. He closed his eyes, trembling all over. A few breaths later, a foul stench sprayed onto his face, nearly making him vomit. Yet strangely, the gaping bloody maw did not sink into him. Not far away, a ragged boy emerged from behind a tree, looking somewhat haggard. It was Li Fei, who had been traveling through the mountains for over 10 days. Seeing this scene, Li Fei's gaze shifted slightly, taking in over a dozen mangled corpses. His face instantly turned pale, his body swayed, and he pressed a hand to his chest. Human life is truly fragile. Letting out a low growl, the blood tiger slowly backed away. Though a beast, it had swallowed a spirit herb years ago, greatly enhancing its intelligence. Despite the young man's pitiful appearance, it sensed a hint of danger from him. "Uncle E, run!" Jiang Hong coughed blood as he shouted. Jiang Yi opened his eyes upon hearing this, trembling as he stepped aside. Only then did he see Li Fei standing face to face with the blood tiger, and he quickly called out, "Little brother, run." This fiend seems to have cultivated for years. Its strength is extraordinary. "Get away." Li Fei said nothing. Though his face was extremely pale, he quietly surged the spiritual energy within his body, locking eyes with the blood tiger as he stepped forward step by step. A mix of fear and greed flickered in the blood tiger's eyes. Its keen senses detected a familiar aura, the Li Fei, before it looked as tempting and delicious as the spiritual herb it had devoured years ago. "Damn it, run!" Seeing that Li Fei not only avoided but actively approached the blood tiger, Jiang Hong shouted in anger, his legs slightly bending as if trying to stand up. However, his injuries were too severe, even breathing brought a sharp pain. At this moment, he could only watch helplessly as the blood tiger approached Li Fei. "Roar!" Seeing Li Fei's calm expression without a trace of fear, the blood tiger's eyes flashed with ferocity. It let out a roar and pounced toward him, the distance between them closing in an instant. Li Fei forcefully suppressed the discomfort in his heart, and a burst of killing intent exploded in his eyes. He threw a heavy punch at the blood tiger's head. Even back when he was still immortal, he often encountered wild beasts while gathering herbs and had narrowly escaped death many times with just a chopping knife. Moreover, over the past dozen days, he had traveled alone through the vast mountains, killing no fewer than 10 fierce beasts and spirits, long overcoming the fear that men like Jiang Hong felt when facing such creatures. Bang! A dull thud rang out as the blood tiger crashed to the ground. Li Fei rolled backward, shook his slightly numb arm, and slowly stood up. This blood tiger was indeed extraordinary. After he had opened the Dao Palace, even hard bluestone could be shattered by his punches, yet just now, he couldn't break through its defense. Jiang Yi, not far away, was secretly startled and stirred with excitement at the sight, seeming to see hope for survival. He snatched the long blade from the guard beside him and threw it to Li Fei, shouting loudly, "Young brother, use the blade. Tiger bones are notoriously hard. Don't strike the bone, stab its throat and lower abdomen." With that, Jiang Yi stumbled toward the sword-shaped talisman, thinking that if Li Fei could hold out for just a moment, he would have a chance to kill the demonic beast with the talisman. Seeing this, Li Fei leaped up, caught the long blade, and, as the blood tiger lunged to bite him again, his eyes sharpened. He kicked fiercely at the tiger's lower jaw, forcing its head to jerk upward. With a gush, the next instant the long blade sank into the blood tiger's throat up to the hilt. Li Fei's eyes were icy cold. He pulled with all his might, ripping open the beast's neck. In a split second, crimson blood sprayed all over him, staining him completely red. As Li Fei knelt on one knee, gasping heavily, the blood tiger's massive body crashed to the ground. Its chest heaved a few times before it finally breathed its last. Jiang Yi had just taken the talisman in his hand when he saw this scene and stood frozen in place. Mainly, Li Fei's figure was so slender that compared to the massive body of the blood tiger, it was simply negligible. Li Fei looked up at the Jiang family members, thrust his long blade into the ground, turned around, and walked away slowly. Jiang Yi watched the others lonely and erect back, then woke up, as if from a dream, and quickly gave orders to the others. Rest here for a while, and wait for me to return. With that, he chased after Li Fei. However, after Li Fei had opened the Dao Palace, he had long since transcended the realm of mortals. Even without deliberately increasing his speed, he was far beyond Jiang Yi's comparison. At this moment, although his steps were steady, he traversed mountains and ridges as if on flat ground, and with a flicker of his figure, he disappeared from Jiang Yi's sight. Only after Jiang Yi had followed the blood trail for more than a quarter of an hour did he, panting, arrive at a pool where he saw Li Fei washing his body. "Young master, you've made this old man's search quite a while." Jiang Yi bent over, coughed a few times, and said, "Old Jiang, he hasn't yet thanked the young hero for saving his life. May I ask the young hero's name?" Li Fei shook his head and said, "Old sir, no need to be so formal. I am Li Fei, so it's young hero Li Fei." Jiang Yi caught his breath, then sat down on a nearby blue stone, stroking his beard and smiling. "To be honest, we are from the Jiang family of Bluestone City. If not for the young hero's intervention today, we would have been in dire straits. Why not come back with us to the Jiang residence, so we can properly repay your life-saving kindness?" Upon hearing this, Li Fei paused. He had been traveling through the mountains and forests for over 10 days without seeing any settlements, not even knowing where he was. Seeing that the old man did not seem like a villain, he thought it wouldn't hurt to make his acquaintance. So after a moment of silence, he said, "Then I thank you. Old sir, there's no need to call me young hero. Just Li Fei is fine." "Ha ha, young hero, you are too modest." Jiang Yi, seeing that the other had agreed, laughed heartily and said, "In that case, I'll presume to call you young friend, if I may." Seeing Li Fei finish washing and stand up with a nod, Jiang Yi quickly led the way. At this moment, to accommodate Jiang Yi's condition, Li Fei did not dart forward as before, but simply followed behind him like an ordinary youth. In response to Jiang Yi's words, he only replied occasionally, remaining mostly silent without uttering a word. When the two returned to the convoy, they saw the remaining guards carrying Jiang Hong onto the carriage, waiting intently for his return. Seeing that the youth who had just slain the blood tiger was also by Jiang Yi's side, the guards stood upright, their gazes constantly sweeping over Li Fei, filled with gratitude. Jiang Yi looked around, a trace of pain in his eyes, and let out a long sigh. "Bury the dead here. Return to Qingshi City as fast as possible. After we arrive safely, send more people to retrieve the supplies. As for their families, I will make proper arrangements for each one." The guards nodded in agreement and silently set to work. Li Fei slowly took a deep breath, feeling less discomfort than before, and silently helped with the burials. Seeing this, the other guards' eyes showed even greater gratitude than before. After everyone was buried, Jiang Yi took a robe from the carriage and handed it to Li Fei to change into, saying, "Forgive me, young friend. On the road, we keep things simple. Once we return to Bluestone City, I'll go to the best shop and pick something out for you." Li Fei simply shook his head calmly and declined the other's kindness. As the sun sank below the hills and pitch-black night enveloped the land, Jiang Yi and his party finally galloped back into Bluestone City. He arranged for Li Fei to stay in a residence and then hurriedly took his leave, presumably busy handling the affairs of the fallen guards. Li Fei didn't mind. He sat on the bed of his own accord and closed his eyes to rest. For over 10 days, he had been on guard day and night against wild beasts and spirits, never truly resting. Even though his physique was now extraordinary, he couldn't help but feel deeply exhausted. Creak! After an unknown amount of time, the residence's wooden door was suddenly pushed open. In the inner room, Li Fei, who had been meditating, snapped his eyes open, his gaze flickering uncertainly. A cultivator, and one whose cultivation far surpassed his own. "Young friend Li Fei, are you asleep?" A middle-aged man's voice came from outside the house, sounding very kind. After a moment of deliberation, Li Fei replied, "Please come in, senior." Having said that, he stood up, smoothed the hem of his clothes, and bowed to the man who pushed the door open and entered. "Please have a seat, senior. May I ask what brings you here late at night?" The man said gently, "Little friend, No need to be formal. I am Jiang Heng, the head of the Jiang family. Today I heard that the Jiang family's caravan encountered monsters and suffered heavy casualties. Fortunately, you stepped in and killed them, thus saving Elder E and the others. So I came specifically to meet you. If there is anything within my power, just say the word. As he spoke, Jiang Heng gazed slightly into Li Fei's eyes and inquired, "Why do you look weary, little friend? Is it that this residence does not suit your liking?" Li Fei shook his head and said, "It's not that. I appreciate your kindness, senior. Are you a cultivator?" Jiang Heng gestured for Li Fei to sit down and nodded, saying, "There aren't many cultivators in Greenstone City, and the Jiang family accounts for half of them. You're not from Greenstone City, are you?" Li Fei said, "I have been cultivating in the mountains with my master since childhood. Only a few days ago did I open the Dao Palace. Following my master's instructions, I left the mountains and headed east to visit old acquaintances." Heading east, Jiang Heng thought for a moment and asked, "Could it be the ancient Pan sect in the east?" Li Fei shook his head and said, "I don't know. Have you heard of the Water Cloud sect?" Jiang Heng was startled and said, "The Water Cloud sect is indeed in the east, but it's millions of miles away from here. How can you, young friend, possibly get there?" "What?" Li Fei was stunned. "Senior Azure Crane sect is actually millions of miles away? Senior, is there a quick way to get to the Water Cloud sect from Bluestone City?" Jiang Heng couldn't help but chuckle wryly and shook his head. Even a Spirit Gate Realm cultivator would find it difficult to make a round trip, and there's not even a Spirit Gate Realm cultivator in Bluestone City. Li Fei fell silent. Was he really going to have to walk all the way there, setting aside the dangers along the way? Even if the path were completely unobstructed, how long would it take him, at his speed, to reach the Water Cloud sect and see Senior Azure Crane? Seeing that Li Fei said nothing, Jiang Heng pondered for a moment. "Young friend, rather than risking the journey yourself, it would be better to wait for the Water Cloud sect to come and receive you. To the northeast of Bluestone City, there is a sect called the Green Sword sect. To be honest, my daughter cultivates there. When she came back a few days ago to pick up her younger sister, she mentioned that in a few months, the Water Cloud sect will take the initiative to come here and recruit talent from smaller sections. Why not temporarily join the Green Sword sect, young friend?" "The Green Sword sect?" Li Fei was silent for a moment, then slowly nodded. Things having come to this, there was no other choice. Seeing this, Jiang Heng spoke with some regret. "The Green Sword sect's disciple recruitment assembly will be held in a few days. It's a pity you arrived a step too late, young friend. Otherwise, you could have traveled with my daughter. I originally wished to keep you here for a few more days to fulfill my duties as host, but the time is rather tight." Li Fei performed a bow and said, "I am truly grateful for your guidance tonight, senior. However, having grown up in the mountains, I am lacking in etiquette. Since the Green Sword sect's recruitment assembly is imminent, I really should not impose any further. I plan to set off early tomorrow morning." Jiang Heng nodded with a smile and placed a pouch on the table, saying, "This is the proceeds from selling that spirit creature, plus the Jiang family's reward 500 spirit stones in total. Please accept them, young friend." Li Fei was taken aback. Though he did not know what spirit stones were, just the word spirit made it seem extraordinary. It must be something used by cultivators. As the saying goes, human life is paramount. I merely passed by the ancient path and acted on a whim. Moreover, tonight the other party answered many of my questions. How could I accept such a favor so easily? He was about to refuse when Jiang Heng waved his hand and walked out the door directly. That demon was naturally not worth 500 spirit stones, but Li Fei had saved several lives of the Jiang family and also spared a sword-shaped talisman, the value of which could not be compared to mere spirit stones. Besides, Li Fei himself was a young prodigy who had opened the Dao Palace. Making some connections with him was definitely not a bad thing. Li Fei picked up the pouch, but his arm lifted slightly, feeling as if it had no weight at all. So light. Just as he was astonished, a faint voice suddenly came from outside the house. "Young friend, this item is called a storage pouch. Inside, it contains its own universe, allowing you to retrieve and store items with spiritual energy. Additionally, young friend, you can use your consciousness to move the Dao Palace into the Naiwan Palace and withdraw your soul into the Dao Palace. Its benefits are 100 times greater than sleep. This is called meditation." Li Fei's body stiffened, realizing that his fabricated identity had been seen through by Jiang Heng. Fortunately, The other party seemed to have no ill intentions. Otherwise today might not have ended well. He sighed inwardly. No wonder Senior Qinghe had repeatedly instructed him when bestowing the pill. His journey to this day was merely a matter of fortuitous coincidence. It seemed he needed to be even more careful from now on. When Li Fei turned back to his bed and passed a bronze mirror, he finally realized the problem. He couldn't meditate and dared not sleep, making him look truly haggard. To an ordinary person, it might not make much difference, but how could it fool a cultivator's eyes? With this thought, Li Fei shook his head and sat on the bed, calming his chaotic thoughts. The Tao Palace manifested, inhaling and exhaling the surrounding spiritual energy. This Jiang Heng's cultivation far surpassed his own. If he had ill intentions, he would have acted long ago. Now that he had seen through Li Fei's identity but didn't expose him and even taught him this meditation method, it seemed there was nothing to worry about. So, following Jiang Heng's instructions, he turned his will into strands that coiled around the Tao Palace, pulling it downward bit by bit. Boom! In Li Fei's eyes, the Tao Palace had been a half-real, half-illusory, lifeless object, but as he exerted his will, it struggled as if alive. The Naiwen Palace, Li Fei murmured to himself, recalling the meridians and acupoints that Li Qing had taught him. His will refused to relax, even slightly. He had relied on the Tao listening pill to open the Tao Palace, which was already an inferior start. If he didn't catch up quickly, how could he stand in the cultivation world and pursue the great Tao? But what he didn't know was that even the talented young lady of the Jiang family had taken a full month to retract the Tao Palace into her body. Yet, under Li Fei's unremitting efforts, before dawn broke, the Tao Palace had already been pulled to the outside of his Naiwen Palace. Then, with a whoosh, the Tao Palace was finally completely tamed, docilely floating in his Naiwen Palace. Li Fei's gaze was deep, and though his eyes were bloodshot, they were terrifyingly tenacious. Li Fei's mind relaxed, and he nearly fainted. But remembering Jiang Heng's instructions, he gritted his teeth and gathered his soul will, drilling into the Tao Palace. But what he didn't expect was that the fatigue accumulated over this period was too heavy, and coupled with the desperate effort to retract the Tao Palace just now, his will had long since reached its limit. At this moment, his soul wandered in the warm, water-like Tao Palace, and in the blink of an eye sank to the bottom, losing all perception of the outside world. Early the next morning, Jiang Yi brought 2 servants to the courtyard gate. He cheerfully knocked on the door, but after a long while, there was no sound from inside. Jiang Yi frowned slightly and tentatively pushed the door open, finding that the wooden door was not locked. So he hurried into the inner room, only to find Li Fei sitting cross-legged on the bed, his expression as calm as a statue, completely still and unresponsive to the outside world. Young friend? Young friend. Jiang Yi's voice gradually rose, but Li Fei still showed no reaction. So he cautiously walked over. Boom! Unexpectedly, just as Jiang Yi reached the bedside, a powerful surge of spiritual energy burst forth from Li Fei's body, clearing the space within a zhang around him. Caught off guard, Jiang Yi was knocked to the ground. Elder Yi, are you all right? The 2 servants were startled and quickly stepped forward to help him up. Grasping the servant's arms, Jiang Yi staggered to his feet, his eyes filled with shock. He hurriedly ordered, quickly go and invite the patriarch over. Tell him that young friend Li Fei is in trouble. Hurry! Seeing Jiang Yi's urgency, the 2 servants rushed out in a flurry. Before long, Jiang Heng flashed into the room, his gaze fixed on Li Fei's body. Patriarch, after I entered the room, the young friend showed no response, no matter how I called him. Can you tell what's wrong? Seeing Jiang Heng arrive, Jiang Yi felt a little relieved and asked with some worry. Jiang Heng didn't say a word. He stepped forward and examined him carefully for a moment, then said with a complicated look in his eyes, Don't worry, young friend. He's entered a state of enlightenment. Have someone guard the door and allow no one to disturb him. Also, have the kitchen prepare food at all times, ready to serve the moment he awakens. Jiang Yi was stunned for a moment, then asked with some confusion, Enlightenment? When a young lady opened her Tao Palace, she also experienced enlightenment, but it didn't seem quite like this young friend's. Jiang Heng shook his head and didn't explain further. Although old Yi was knowledgeable, he was still just a mortal. As for Li Fei entering an enlightened state during his very first meditation, it was truly enviable. Li Fei on the bed was naturally unaware of their conversation. His soul was floating within his Tao palace, as if returning to the womb, undergoing some silent transformation. Wisps of spiritual energy were being drawn into Li Fei's Tao palace one by one. Though the process was slow, not a single shred was wasted. Following some perfect route, the energy circulated on its own, scouring his limbs and bones before being completely absorbed. After an unknown length of time, Li Fei's consciousness gradually stirred, and he slowly opened his eyes. He instinctively took a deep breath, and in an instant, surging spiritual energy flooded in, filling every inch of his meridians, many times stronger than before. "Young friend, you're awake." By the table, Jiang Hung, dressed in a long robe and holding a scroll of scripture, looked like an ordinary scholar. Li Fei was about to rise and bow, but his stomach cramped, nearly causing him to fall, and at the same time, a fierce wave of hunger hit him. Jiang Hung smiled and pointed at the food on the table, saying, "Young friend, no need for formalities. Eat while it's hot." Li Fei, suppressing his hunger, still bowed before sitting down to eat. Seeing that the other person could still maintain his composure despite being in such a state, Jiang Hung couldn't help but secretly admire him. "Young friend, these are some of the finest delicacies in Greenstone City, made by the Jiang family's famous chefs. Please enjoy them." Li Fei shook his head slightly and said, "Thank you for your kindness, senior. But I come from a poor background. Food is only for filling my stomach. Whether it's delicious or not makes little difference to me." After saying this, Li Fei added, "You've passed the Green Sword Sex Assessment, I presume?" Jiang Hung smiled and said, "It has only been 1 day and 2 nights since you arrived at the Jiang residence, young friend." Li Fei was taken aback. So short, he had no sense of time in the Tao Palace and felt quite dazed. He had thought it must have been at least a month, but it turned out to be only a day. Jiang Hung saw Li Fei's confused expression and chuckled lightly. "You may not know this, young friend, but last night you entered a state of sudden enlightenment, so you lost track of time. Such a state is rare and cannot be forced. Even an instant brings great benefit, much less an entire night." Li Fei carefully sensed the changes within himself and nodded respectfully. "Thank you, senior, for your protection. I have truly gained a great deal." Jiang Hung continued, "The improvement in realm is secondary. The most precious aspect of enlightenment is the transformation of the soul and the Tao heart. It is said that in ancient times, a mortal sat under a Bodhi tree and entered enlightenment for 49 days, ultimately achieving profound awakening and ascending to immortality, shocking the entire cultivation world. To be in enlightenment for 49 days, what an unimaginably terrifying fortune would that be?" Li Fei's thoughts churned, but he soon calmed down. After finishing all the dishes one by one, he stood up and said, "The senior's kindness will be repaid, but the Green Sword Sect assessment is imminent, so I must take my leave now." Seeing that the other party was solely focused on passing the assessment to enter the Green Sword Sect, Jiang Hung nodded slightly and said, "In that case, I'll have Elder E see you off." After saying this, he smiled again. "My daughter Jiang Lian is quite well known in the Green Sword Sect. You might get to know her. I believe it would be beneficial to both." Li Fei nodded and said, "If the opportunity arises, I certainly will." Upon hearing this, Jiang Hung straightened his clothes and left. Before long, Jiang Yi arrived at the courtyard entrance with some people. Seeing Li Fei, he spoke with emotion. "Young friend, you are truly an unparalleled prodigy, your talent perhaps even surpassing that of my young lady." Li Fei cupped his hands and said, "Elder Yi flatters me. I have always been solitary and not good with words. I have troubled you these past 2 days. Please forgive me. As we part, I wish you well, Elder Yi." Jiang Yi gestured with his hand, and several servants came forward carrying luxurious clothes, a long sword, and a jade pendant, standing on either side for Li Fei to inspect. "Young friend, do not be modest. If not for you slaying the demon, I would have lost my life. Please accept these small gifts." Li Fei couldn't refuse repeatedly, so he finally picked out 2 plain robes and took the long sword in his hand, returning the rest. Jiang Yi didn't insist further, waved his hand to dismiss the servant, and said with emotion, Escaping from the monster's mouth the other day made me see many worldly matters with indifference. I didn't expect that you, young friend, though so young, have an even more detached mindset than I do. No wonder you can catch a glimpse of the immortal path. Li Fei shook his head and said, on the path of cultivation, life is like floating duckweed. Incidents of killing and seizing treasures are endless. Many people get caught up in it and cannot help themselves. Being as free and easy as Elder E, enjoying a peaceful life in the mortal world to the end of one's days, is not without its pleasures. Jiang, he was slightly startled. Such words really didn't sound like those of a teenager. He was about to continue asking when he saw Li Fei straightening his robes and preparing to take his leave, so he fell silent and began to accompany him. Seeing this, Li Fei gently waved his hand to stop Jiang Yi's steps, took 2 steps back, bowed, turned around, and walked out of the Jiang family's main gate. Jiang Yi watched Li Fei, holding the long sword, his posture upright, his back exuding an indescribably transcendent aura. A moment of daze appeared in his eyes. He suddenly regretted why he hadn't had the same courage as Li Fei when he was young. Eldery, what do you think? Jiang Heng came to his side at some point and asked inquiringly. Jiang Yi sighed deeply and said, an old man like me, with mortal eyes and a dull mind, how could I recognize a true dragon soaring in the clouds? From now on, let the younger generation handle the internal affairs of the Jiang family. I am old in years and only wish to tend to flowers, brew tea, and occasionally visit a few old friends when the mood strikes. That would be enough to make this life worthwhile. Jiang Heng nodded and said, this young man appears courteous in manner and casual in bearing, but there is always a coldness and distance in his eyes. He must have experienced extraordinary things. As for his heart, not even I can see it clearly, let alone you. He paused for a moment, then continued. Since Elder he no longer wishes to involve himself in these worldly matters, from now on Jiang Hong and others will manage them together. Lien and Li have already joined the Qingjian sect. As of today, Jiang Yu will be the new candidate for the Dao of the Jiang family, receiving the same resources as Li before her enlightenment. Upon hearing this, Jiang Yi was momentarily stunned, then said gratefully, thank you, Patriarch. The resources given to a Dao candidate by the Jiang family are considerable. They include a series of rare body cleansing spiritual medicines to refine and remove the candidate's acquired impurities, as well as a monthly allowance of a clarity heart pill to aid in comprehending the Dao heart. You must understand that the clear heart pill is not something just anyone can refine. Even the Jiang family, as one of the 2 major cultivation clans in Bluestone City, can only obtain it from the Green Sword sect by spending a vast amount of resources. Jiang Heng slipped past without leaving a trace and said no more. Meanwhile, Li Fei, eager to reach the Green Sword sect in time for the assessment, leaped 2 or 3 zhang at a time, his movements as agile as an ape's. He quickly crossed one gully and rocky hill after another, unable to help feeling a surge of emotion. Enlightenment truly was a coveted opportunity if before he had relied purely on physical strength for travel and battle. Now his control over power was much more flexible, his entire body noticeably more coordinated, and the flow of spiritual energy felt as natural as a fish in water. It seems I must enter the Green Sword sect, no matter what. Li Fei murmured and quickened his pace again. If even one meditation session could benefit him so much, wouldn't obtaining the sect's cultivation techniques and resources be thousands of times more efficient than figuring things out on his own? With this thought, Li Fei no longer cared if anyone saw him. He secretly channeled his spiritual energy to the soles of his feet. With each leap, the force was so great that it left a small pit wherever his foot landed. A few days later, after Li Fei's relentless pursuit, a magnificent and majestic mountain peak came into his view. Li Fei looked up and saw the peak standing straight as a sword, piercing deep into the clouds, surrounded by ethereal and hazy mist. Within the mist, a rugged path faintly appeared, winding upward like a dragon, as if leading straight into the sky, clearly not a place for ordinary mortals. As he approached, before even reaching the mountain gate, Li Fei was engulfed by a bustling crowd. Since leaving Qingshan village, this was the first time he had been so close to so many people. Li Fei was clearly uncomfortable and simply kept his head down, pushing forward in silence. Fortunately, at the gate beneath the archway, inscribed with the three large characters Green Sword Sect, a middle-aged cultivator in a Taoist robe was maintaining order. Seeing this, Li Fei stepped forward and bowed, saying, "Senior, I am Li Fei, and I wish to join the Green Sword Sect. Might I ask if this is where the assessment takes place?" The crowd around Li Fei paused their murmurs for a moment upon hearing this. The Green Sword Sect was the only cultivation sect in this region, and its assessments always drew significant attention from places like Greenstone City. Not only that, because the Green Sword Sect's assessment had no entry threshold, any young person who could make it here, even if they had never practiced cultivation before, would come and try, hoping to catch a glimpse of immortal fate. Among them, Xuan Ti waited respectfully before the assessment. When had they ever been like this youth, who didn't even know the time and place? The middle-aged cultivator, however, didn't mind at all and just said with a slight smile, "That's right, but you'd better hurry. The assessment has already been going on for over half a day." Li Fei had just relaxed when his heart tightened again upon hearing the rest, so he continued to ask, "May I ask, Senior, what is the content of the assessment? What preparations do I need to make?" Before the middle-aged cultivator could reply, someone behind Li Fei suddenly sneered. "Seeking immortal fate is as momentous as a carp leaping over the dragon gate. With such lazy and lax behavior, how can you pass the assessment and join the immortal sect? You're just wasting your time." Li Fei acted as if he hadn't heard, his expression unchanged as he stood solemnly before the middle-aged cultivator, unmoving, waiting for his reply. Seeing this, the middle-aged cultivator raised an eyebrow, a little surprised inwardly. This youth had a good temperament and was good material for cultivation. He pointed at the small path behind the gate tower and said with a light laugh, "See this path? If you can follow it all the way to the mountaintop, you will become a member of the Green Sword Sect. Tonight at midnight, all those who have not reached the summit will be eliminated, and those who have will compete against each other to determine the rankings. Now, there are still 4 hours until midnight, and you need to traverse 9,999 steps." Li Fei nodded slightly. After thanking the middle-aged cultivator, he directly stepped onto the path and headed toward the mountaintop. The one who had sneered earlier immediately let out a cold laugh. This mountain path, as the Green Sword Sect's assessment site, couldn't possibly be as simple as it appeared on the surface. The others were also surprised, but no one offered a warning. After all, if this young man was eliminated, their junior's chances of joining the Green Sword Sect would increase by a fraction. However, just as everyone was waiting to see Li Fei make a fool of himself, they saw him pause only slightly before continuing upward with the ease of a leisurely stroll. The crowd was somewhat taken aback. This young man didn't even know the time or place of the assessment, yet his strength seemed far from weak. Could he be a descendant from some reclusive clan? But the one who had spoken earlier still remained unimpressed, taunting Li Fei. "The formations on this mountain path grow stronger the further you go. If you don't proceed step by step and instead rush headlong, you'll be eliminated within at most half an hour." Upon hearing this, the others shook their heads. This youth, despite not knowing the formations, was still able to cross like anyone else's talent was clearly extraordinary. Even with only 4 hours left, his chances of passing the test were not low. "This Wang Yu indeed has a reputation for being petty," someone in the crowd muttered quietly. Li Fei paused his steps, then continued forward without a trace, disappearing around the bend in the mountain path within moments. The ancient, rough stone steps were covered with frost marks carved by time. Countless youths, some ahead, some behind, moved forward with difficulty like ants. As time passed bit by bit, Li Fei's figure rose continuously. He clearly felt the gravity bearing down on him growing stronger, pressing his bones until they creaked. "No, I can't go on. I refuse to give up." A disjointed roar reached Li Fei's ears. He looked up and saw a young man in his early 20s stumbling and falling onto the stone steps, his eyes filled with deep despair. At that moment, the layers of unattainable stone steps seemed to rest among the clouds, making them appear forever out of reach to the young man. The divide between immortals and mortals was as vast as clouds, and mud this fall meant he had completely descended into the mundane world, and relying on himself to embark on the path of cultivation was nothing short of a pipe dream. Li Fei did not pause, but walked forward step by step, quickly passing the fallen young man. However, as he climbed higher, more people appeared around him, some crying, some furious, some utterly broken, but most were stubbornly crawling forward inch by inch, even as the formation crushed them to the ground. Li Fei's expression remained calm, yet emotions churned deep within him. He suddenly understood why the Azure Sword sect had not set a threshold like the Water Cloud sect, nor had they made any preparations for them, because there was no need. Under the oppressive force of the formation's gravity, those lacking in strength would naturally be eliminated. If he had not swallowed the Dao hearing pill and opened his Dao palace, he would likely be one of them right now. 10 more steps ahead. A youth around Li Fei's age was already spitting blood under the pressure of the gravity. Yet he still clamped his fingers onto the next step of the stone stairs, then pulled his body over inch by inch. First his arm, then his chest, and finally his legs. By the time he crawled over the next step, he was nearly unconscious. Just then, Li Fei suddenly keenly noticed that the gravity on the youth seemed to ease a bit, and even traces of spiritual energy emerged, silently seeping into his body from beneath him. Li Fei was stunned. This formation was being controlled by someone. Watching the youth, who had just regained consciousness but was already climbing toward the next step, Li Fei felt an inexplicable emotion stir in his heart. So that's how it is. Whether he had opened the Dao Palace or not didn't actually matter, because these stone stairs in the assessment were ones that everyone present could ascend. The difference lay in that some people relied on formidable strength and extraordinary talent, while others could only rely on unyielding willpower and a steadfast heart for the Dao to make it up. Just like himself dozens of days ago, who swallowed the Dao awakening pill and traded a mortal lifetime for a single day of knocking at the Dao Palace. Li Fei trudged forward silently. Although the gravity on the stone steps had reached an extremely terrifying level, each step felt like carrying a mountain on his back. For someone who had opened the Dao Palace and just experienced a night of enlightenment, it wasn't as miserable as it was for others. At this moment, Li Fei actually felt a growing fondness for the Greensword sect. Because the assessment had no age or cultivation level restrictions, as long as he hadn't given up on the idea of cultivation, no one would reject him. And so he continued until the last step. Li Fei stopped and slowly turned around. Before his eyes, countless struggling beings seemed to appear. These layers of stone steps were like the various realms on the path of cultivation. Only with absolute belief could one stand out among the masses. Otherwise, as their lifespan decreased and talent declined, they would be forever abandoned on a certain step, turning to yellow earth. Pah! The blood from the young man's mouth stained the ground, but his face was still smiling. Li Fei did not help him, nor did he ask Li Fei for help. He just chased the other's silhouette step by step until the end. Li Fei bent down and picked the other up, his blue robe instantly stained with a lot of blood. Thank you. The youth forced a faint smile and said, "If you hadn't been waiting for me, you probably could have moved faster. Sorry for making you watch my embarrassment." Li Fei shook his head and said, "Fellow cultivator, the road is still long. A moment of speed or slowness is fleeting. With perseverance, you will eventually transcend." The young man seemed somewhat tired, his eyes slightly closed as he murmured, "I have exhausted all methods, yet I still cannot open the Dao Palace. Unless I can find the legendary one Dao Pill, but it can only be found in the most top-tier sects in the world." Saying this, he pushed Li Fei away with difficulty and said with a smile, "Go quickly. I wish you a good ranking." Li Fei nodded, helped the young man sit up, then turned around, took out his long sword, and walked toward the other side of the mountain peak. Under the moonlight, both the man and his sword stood straight, deeply imprinted in the young man's eyes. Li Fei turned around a rugged rock wall, and the scene before him opened up. It turned out to be a huge arena spanning over 100 zhang in radius. Many prodigies who had passed early were scattered around the arena, some chatting, others resting with closed eyes, all waiting for the final competition to begin. Li Fei descended along the mountain cliff, immediately drawing the attention of the prodigies, mainly because his blood-stained long robe stood out too conspicuously. Generally speaking, those capable of reaching the mountaintop and competing for rankings would not end up in such a miserable state, while those who struggled all day to climb up would not come here to invite trouble. Li Fei was not good with words anyway, and with the onlooker's eyes somewhat mocking, he simply found a corner, placed his long sword across his knees, and began to meditate. When the moon was high in the sky, no one else had arrived at the arena. Li Fei opened his eyes at just the right moment and saw that the middle-aged cultivator who had been maintaining order at the foot of the mountain had somehow come to the edge of the arena. His eyes held approval as he scanned the crowd, and when his gaze passed over Li Fei, it paused noticeably. "Welcome to Sword Peak. I am Wang Ping, an outer sect elder of the Azure Sword sect. You all must already know the rules, but I will repeat them anyway. During the competition, if one side concedes, the other must immediately stop. Also, fighting multiple opponents against one is not allowed. Aside from that, there are no other restrictions. Begin." As soon as Wang Ping finished speaking, some prodigies couldn't hold back and started picking suitable opponents to spar with. The Green Sword Sect's newcomer assessment only rewards the first place, so the vast majority are just supporting roles. Only a few are conserving their strength, planning to compete for the rewards after the free-for-all ends. Li Fei, being new here, naturally didn't understand these rules. Seeing that others had already started fighting, and having never encountered a cultivator of the same realm before, he couldn't help but have some thoughts. Looking around, Li Fei noticed a young girl who also had no opponent. Moreover, the people around her kept a wide distance during their fights, leaving plenty of space. He walked over and politely bowed, saying, "Fellow Taoist, I am Li Fei. Would you be willing to instruct me?" The sounds of swords and blades around them seemed to pause for a moment. The young girl lifted her eyes slightly, glanced at him indifferently, and said, "You want to fight me?" Li Fei nodded. "Indeed. Please enlighten me, fellow Taoist." Seeing Li Fei's insistence, some people sneered inwardly. They hadn't expected him to be such a reckless novice. This was going to be interesting. The Jiang family's swordsmanship had long been renowned. In the previous competition, the top newcomer was taken by Jiang Li's elder sister. It was said that she fought with true fire, and even two Dao Palace realm prodigies joined hands against her, but were defeated. The sisters' temperaments were notoriously hard to provoke. Sure enough, upon hearing this, Jiang Li casually drew her long sword, its tip pointing directly at Li Fei, and said coldly, "My goal is only the first place. Since you want to use my name to attract attention, then come." With that, Jiang Li's dress fluttered, and her long sword, driven by spiritual energy, shot forward like a streak of light in a lethal attack. Although Li Fei had no experience fighting other cultivators, the quality of his Dao Palace far surpassed Jiang Li's, so he managed to block in time, though he was pushed back several steps. "Ah, so you do have some skill. No wonder you dare to fight me." Jiang Li snorted coldly. Her blade was as cold as frost, and her attacks grew fiercer, clearly employing some exquisite swordsmanship. Li Fei felt a web of sword lights intertwining and striking at him, dancing like spirit serpents. Even with his spiritual energy fully circulating, he could barely see clearly. As expected of a prodigy who opened the Dao Palace through his own efforts far stronger than me. But although this sword technique is exquisite, its power is lacking clearly. He is testing me. Since that's the case, I should also respond with sword techniques and spar. With this thought, Li Fei slightly suppressed his Dao Palace to bring their power to the same level, then swung his sword to engage. However, Jiang Li, as a prodigy of the Jiang family, had been favored with the family's resources since childhood. Although her sword technique could not compare to that of the Green Sword sect, it was renowned across various cities and rarely met its match. How could her skills be compared to ordinary ones? In just a quarter of an hour, Li Fei was overwhelmed and in constant danger. Several bloody wounds appeared on his robe. The prodigies watching gradually grew solemn. This Jiang Li truly lived up to her reputation. Having been steeped in family teachings since childhood, they could naturally see that although Li Fei seemed reckless, his strength was not low. The reason his injuries were so severe was entirely because Jiang Li was too strong. Wang Ping, standing nearby, nodded slightly, secretly praising that Jiang Li indeed had some of her sister's brilliance. However, Li Fei had reached the mountain peak in just over 3 hours logically. His strength should not be so limited. This kid still won't admit defeat. Battles between cultivators often end in the blink of an eye. At this moment, some had already finished their fights and were observing Jiang Li's swordsmanship, hoping to find a flaw in her technique. Seeing this, Jiang Li furrowed her brows slightly, her gaze growing colder. She had originally planned to hold back some tricks for the biggest opponents, but this Li Fei seemed to have a masochistic addiction even after being slashed by her longsword. He remained expressionless and continued to grapple. How long would this go on? How could she know that Li Fei had never experienced combat with others since his enlightenment? Now, encountering a prodigy like Jiang Li, whose strength wasn't too far beyond his own, but whose swordsmanship far surpassed his, he was truly overjoyed to have found a worthy opponent. On the other hand, Li Fei's injuries looked miserable, but they were only superficial flesh wounds, far less severe than the heavy injuries he had endured as a mortal. In exchange, his swordsmanship was advancing by leaps and bounds. Why not? Hateful. Where did this freak come from? Since you're so stubborn and unyielding, don't blame me for being merciless. Jiang Li gritted her teeth silently, suddenly stepping out in a strange sequence with her feet, moving swiftly across the arena platform at a speed far greater than before. She had already unleashed the unique body technique of the Jiang family. In coordination with a long sword in her hand, a trace of killing intent emerged, stabbing toward Li Fei like a venomous snake. Leaves dancing. The onlookers were all startled, and several prodigies vying for first place were especially on high alert. This swordsmanship, let alone Li Fei, even they would find it very difficult to withstand. As they expected, Li Fei's hastily swung sword struck nothing. Although he tried his best to dodge, he was still stabbed in the left arm, and blood immediately streamed down. Jiang Li took a few inconspicuous breaths, suppressing the surging spiritual energy within her. After her breathing had calmed down slightly, she sheathed her long sword back into its scabbard with a clang sound and said calmly, "Commendable courage." Li Fei covered his arm, his face pale, and said, "Thank you for the instruction, fellow Taoist. I have benefited greatly." After saying this, he sighed inwardly, realizing that he was still far behind the true prodigies. The rest of the crowd involuntarily stepped back, as if intimidated by Jiang Li. However, one young man's eyes flickered with a different thought. This Li Fei arrived the latest and was covered in blood. He must have exhausted himself climbing the stone steps. Now being easily defeated by Jiang Li further proves that he is at his wit's end. His own strength was already inferior to the crowd, and he had just been defeated by his opponent in 2 moves, inviting ridicule. At this moment, why not fight this Li Fei to somewhat salvage his reputation?